Hello, my name is Kiran Joni. This is the seventh in the introduction series of the Eso-Loop Framework. The last session was about the first component of the framework, that is complex ecological worldview. This session is about the second of the three components of the framework, that is effectual self-organization. Here I will discuss the idea of self-organization in detail. I will discuss the nature, features, and dynamics of self-organization. Then I will introduce the idea of effectual self-organization, which is a primary keystone constraint followed by self-organizing systems. So let us start with the idea of self-organization itself. Self-organization refers to the emergence of stable patterns through autonomous and self-reinforcing dynamics at the micro level. In other words, self-organization is a phenomena in which local interactions leads to global patterns emerging. The self here suggests autonomy and self-maintenance. It is also important to note that self-organization is a ubiquitous feature in open complex adaptive systems. According to complexity scholar Dirk Helbing, what makes complex systems so difficult to control is that they have a natural tendency to self-organize, driven by the inherent forces between the system components. As I already discussed in another video, once scholars started to realize that self-organization is a ubiquitous feature in open complex adaptive systems, scholars started to study this phenomena and found that self-organization is an intelligent way in which nature organizes itself to solve complex adaptive system problems in a distributed and adaptive manner, which cannot be replicated by top-down order or top-down prescription. We can find examples of self-organization in all kinds of systems. Let us have a look at the example of termites. Termites are known to construct the highest structures on the planet relative to the size of the buildings. Yet there is no chief executive among termites, no chief architect termite, and there is also no blueprint to build this structure. Each termite acts locally, following only few simple shared rules of behavior within a context of other termites also acting locally. The termite mound emerges from this process of self-organization. You can find similar patterns across all kinds of complex adaptive systems, whether it is the dynamics of ants, whether it is the dynamics of bees in a beehive, or people walking in a street, or in the case of bird murmuration, or in the market dynamics. There are also scholars who proposes the idea of self-organization, the invisible hand that was talked about by Adam Smith. According to Adam Smith, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. Basically, Adam Smith is talking about the local interactions leading to global patterns emerging, local adaptive behavior leading to global patterns emerging. This articulation very well fits with the self-organization dynamics. From this understanding that self-organization is a ubiquitous feature in open complex adaptive systems, and also from the understanding that self-organization is an intelligent way in which nature do things, scholars and practitioners started to design various solutions and experiment various solutions across various domains and problems. As I already mentioned, I am particularly inspired by one such successful approach developed based on self-organization theory, which is applied in sports coaching called the constraint-based approach. And that was my inspiration for thinking about the possibility of designing something for the domain of entrepreneurship based on self-organization theory. And in this framework, my main agenda is to bring that thinking to the domain of entrepreneurship, and effectual self-organization is the first step to do that. Now, before jumping into the idea of effectual self-organization, let us have a look into some of the key features of self-organizing systems to facilitate that introduction. Here I use two different meta-studies of self-organization definitions that identified key features of self-organizing systems discussed commonly. They are DeWolf and Holvoit, which was published in 2004. Second one is Gilbert et al., which was published in 2015. By comparing these two studies, we can see that overlap features identified by these two scholarly works. Therefore, by correcting this, we can list 5 key features of self-organizing systems as follows. First one is increase in order. Second one is pattern formation. Third one is autonomy. Fourth one is robustness, resilience, and adaptability. And final one is dynamics. The first key feature is increase in order. Self-organizing systems have the ability to spontaneously increase their order and complexity over time. This means that they can generate patterns and structures that are not present in their initial state. This increase in order is driven by the interactions and feedback between the components of the system. The second key feature is pattern formation, which is very much similar or associated with the first key feature, that is increase in order. Self-organizing systems are also capable of forming patterns and structures at different scales, from microscopic level to the macroscopic level. The third key feature is autonomy. In order for self-organization to happen, the system must be autonomous. Autonomy refers to the absence of external control. A system needs to organize without interference from the outside to be called self-organized. This doesn't mean that input is not possible. Information coming in is not possible. Information and input are possible as long as it is not control instructions or prescriptions. The fourth key feature identified by scholars is robustness, resilience, and adaptability. Self-organizing systems are robust, resilient, and adaptable. This means that they can maintain their functionality and stability even in the face of internal and external disturbances, failures, or changes. In this, even if some agents fails or being removed, the overall patterns or functions still persist. The robustness and resilience can be thought of as due to diversity and redundancy of the components, as well as the distributed nature of control and regulation that is in a self-organizing system. The final key feature is dynamics. Self-organizing systems are dynamical, which means that they operate far from thermodynamic equilibrium. The non-equilibrium state is characterized by continuous exchange of energy, matter, and information between components and the generation of complexity. It is important to note here that equilibrium is death. Self-organization occurs in systems that are far from thermodynamic equilibrium and operate at the edge of chaos. The far from equilibrium dynamics provides energy and resources needed for self-organization and complexity generation, while the edge of chaos dynamics can be seen as providing criticality and flexibility for adaptation in case of perturbation, or maybe phase shift, or big changes. Understanding the interplay between these dynamics is crucial for designing and controlling self-organizing systems. Now, as the next key agenda, we are going to stress on the dynamics of self-organization. Dynamics of self-organization can be understood in terms of four key dynamical features or constraints, as I call it. These features are dispositionality, adjacent possible, co-evolutionary dynamics, and emergent and evolving reality, which enable a system to exhibit complex and adaptive behaviors that arise from the interactions between its components. The first key feature is dispositionality. Dispositionality refers to the inherent potential or propensity or tendency of the system to behave this way or that way. According to philosopher Stephen Mumford, disposition is a term used in metaphysics, usually to indicate a type of property, state, or condition. Such a property is one that provides for the possibility for some further specific state or behavior, usually in circumstances of some specific kind. Terms such as causal power, capacity, ability, propensity, and others can be used to convey the same idea. As we already discussed in the third video in the series, the key point to understand is that in a self-organizing complex system, causal structures cannot be known a priori. We can only know, and also the system itself can only know the current dispositional propensity of the system in relation to the disposition of the state space. We also used various examples to demonstrate this idea. We looked at the example of the biological system of a lion, in which we discussed the lion's dispositional propensity to eat other animals. We then observed the example of sports, which can be considered as a structured complexity domain, where we observed the example of Ronaldo's dispositional propensity to score a goal in next few seconds. We also looked at the example of a startup. An investor or the startup itself or the CEO of the startup cannot know the causal structures a priori, but can only make a judgment based on current dispositional propensities of the system, which is the product or the venture itself. These might include product-related propensities, person-related dispositional propensities, and environment-related dispositional propensities, etc. Let me use the example of bird memorization to explain this idea further. We cannot know the shape of bird memorization beforehand. We can only know the current dispositional propensity. With this thinking, we can assume that the first image, that is image A, demonstrates the dispositional propensity to become image B, than become image D or C. The second key feature is adjacent possible. The adjacent possible can be defined as a set of possibilities available to individuals, communities, institutions, organisms, productive processes, etc. at a given point of time during their evolution. The concept of adjacent possible was introduced by Stuart Kaufman in evolutionary biology and complex adaptive systems to explain how biological evolution can be seen as exploration and actualization of what is the adjacent possible. The adjacent possible is thus a kind of possibility space towards which change and evolution are more likely because of the current disposition of the system. In a bigger picture, the adjacent possible can be seen as the product of current dispositional propensities. The adjacent possible can manifest in multiple ways. The adjacent possible in a flocking behavior can be understood in the micro level through three simple rules followed by birds. They are separation, avoiding crowding neighbors. Second one is alignment, steering towards average heading of the neighbors. And third one is cohesion, steering towards average position of the neighbors. If the birds follow these simple rules, this can be seen as the manifestation of the adjacent possible. This kind of adjacent possible dynamics can also be understood in terms of dynamics that happen under the constraints of aerodynamics, physical exertion, etc. The next key dynamical feature is coevolution. According to Paul Cilliers, self-organization process is a result of an evolutive process whereby a system will simply not survive if it cannot adapt to more complex circumstances. He also adds that a complex system, such as a living organism or a growing economy, has to develop its structure and be able to adapt that structure in order to cope with changes in the environment. Claiming an external designer merely begs the question of the origin of complexity, and we have to find mechanisms by which a system can acquire and adapt its internal structure on an evolutionary basis. In both these quotes, Paul Cilliers clearly stresses the evolutionary foundations of self-organization dynamics. According to Dave Snowden, if a system is complex, you cannot set outcome targets a priori, but you can define a vector target, that is, direction and speed of change from the present against the intensity of effort. You can't manage to a desired future state, but have to manage the evolutionary potential of the situated present. Now that we observe that the dynamics of complex self-organizing systems have in its foundation an evolutionary basis, let's move on to the idea of coevolution. The important thing to note is that evolution and coevolution are interdependent and inseparable concepts. Stuart Kaufman observed that all evolution is really coevolution. According to him, the true and stunning success of biology reflects the fact that organisms do not merely evolve, they co-evolve both with other organisms and with the changing abiotic environment. It is important to note here that the term coevolution here in this framework is used in a wider perspective, inclusive of micro manifestations like co-dynamics, as in the case of the dynamics between a tool and the tool user, for example. The fourth key feature is emergent and evolving reality. This specifically refers to change. It is important to understand that things will change via evolutionary dynamics and also through emergence. Emergent property, as we already discussed, refers to the characteristic that is found across a system, but which individual parts of the system do not themselves hold. It is also important to note that the new emergent and evolving reality will become the current dispositional reality in the self-organization process. Now, it must be noted that these four key dynamical features are well recognized and discussed by scholars, mostly in an isolated manner. If we try to observe the dynamics of self-organizing systems, whether it is the dynamics of bees in a beehive, whether it is in the case of street walking group of people, whether it is weaver ant coordinating with each other, or whether it is in the case of bird flocking, all of these are examples of self-organizing systems that exhibits the four keystone dynamical features, that is dispositionality, adjacent possible, co-evolution, and finally emergent and evolving reality, which will become the current dispositional reality. It is important to note that all of these four features are part of the same dynamical processes and all happen simultaneously. All of these are part of the same non-linear process and are inseparable. So it is very important to understand that these are not separate ways of doing things. These are part of interconnected, entangled, and inseparable dynamics. These four key dynamical features are the foundation over which the idea of effectual self-organization is built on. This idea will be discussed in the second part of the session. See you soon in the second part of this video.